As the days went by, I began to notice subtle changes in Michael's behavior. My adopted son had returned from university with an air about him that I couldn't quite place, an awareness that seemed deeper and more searching than before. It wasn't uncommon for family dynamics to shift as children grew, but this felt different, more pronounced. The first time I caught him looking, I was in the kitchen, focused on a simple task, cutting vegetables, minding the stove, and feeling the soft rhythm of daily life around me. I could feel his presence before I even saw him. I glanced up, and there he was, standing just beyond the doorway, looking at me. Not with the usual warmth, but with an intensity that was both unsettling and intriguing. "Everything all right?" I asked, brushing off a strange sense of self-consciousness as I met his gaze. He blinked as if breaking free from a trance, and his lips curled into a soft, familiar smile. "Yeah, just home feels different when you're away at school, you know." We went about the day without further incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something unspoken lingered between us. That night, as I settled into bed, my thoughts drifted to him, his words, his quiet, contemplative looks, and I found myself wondering if there was something more to it, or if I was just imagining things. Days turned into weeks, and it was in the small moments that I began to feel it the most. The way he would sit across from me during dinner, his eyes occasionally drifting over my face, lingering a bit too long, or how he seemed to find excuses to be around me. There was a subtle shift in his demeanor that felt more attentive than before. I questioned myself endlessly, wondering if maybe this was all in my head. One evening, we sat down to watch a movie, something we hadn't done in ages. The house was silent, save for the soft flicker of the TV in the dimly lit room. We had been laughing at some scene when his hand brushed mine. It was such a simple touch, one that should have gone unnoticed. But the warmth of his skin left a small electric spark that startled me. "Sorry," he murmured, pulling his hand away, and I felt a strange pang of a loss. He seemed to notice my reaction, his gaze softening as he looked at me. "You seem different," he said almost hesitantly. I glanced down, hoping to hide my flush. "Oh, I think it's you who's changed," I replied with a laugh, hoping to diffuse the tension. "All grown up now," but he just kept watching me. A look that was serious, searching, maybe. Or maybe I was just seeing things more clearly. Those words hung in the air, unsettling and magnetic all at once. And for a moment, neither of us moved. I could feel a crack in the boundary that had always separated us, a fragile line that suddenly felt dangerously thin. I cleared my throat abruptly, getting up from the couch and brushing off the moment as best as I could. "I think I'll get ready for bed. Long day tomorrow." Michael's eyes followed me as I made my way down the hall, and I didn't need to turn around to know he was watching me leave. The next morning I awoke feeling more unsettled than ever. It was as if that shared moment had cracked open something I wasn't prepared to face, something I hadn't allowed myself to consider. At breakfast, things felt even more tense. Michael sat across from me, unusually quiet, his gaze steady and unreadable. I focused on my coffee, feeling my pulse quicken whenever I felt his eyes drift over me. "I was thinking," he finally spoke, breaking the silence. "Maybe we could spend the day together, just us." There was something in his tone, soft yet resolute, that made my heart race. It had been so long since we'd had a day just to ourselves. And part of me yearned to recapture that closeness, to ground myself in the role I knew. Sure, I agreed, trying to keep my voice steady. Just like old times. As we walked through the local park, I felt an overwhelming sense of nostalgia. Bittersweet memories from when he was just a boy. Yet now, there was a maturity in him that was unmistakable, a silent strength, a presence that I found disarming. We talked about his classes, his ambitions, his life away from home. I wanted to absorb every detail, to remember these moments before he'd be gone again. We stopped at a clearing, gazing at the lake shimmering under the late afternoon sun. And I felt a sudden quiet intimacy settle between us. "I've missed this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Being here with you." "I have too," I replied softly. Feeling the weight of the words, he turned to face me, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity I hadn't seen before. "You know, Mom, you're more to me than just family. You're everything." The words sent a jolt through me. His face was close, too close, and I felt that familiar electric tension crackle between us. I took a deep breath, torn between instinct and the surge of emotions I didn't want to admit to myself. "Michael," I started, my voice barely above a whisper, but he placed a hand on my arm, gently but firmly. "Don't," he said softly, his eyes earnest, pleading. "Don't say anything. I needed you to know, to understand." I felt my defenses crumbling, my heart pounding against my ribs as his words settled over me. The days leading up to my husband's return were tense, heavy, with the unresolved energy that Michael and I danced around, each of us too cautious to bring it into the light. I busied myself around the house, cleaned up more than I needed to, rearranged shelves that hadn't been touched in years. Anything to keep my mind from spiraling back to that afternoon in the park. When he texted me the night before to confirm his arrival, I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. I had missed him, missed the normalcy his presence brought, yet I couldn't ignore the thought gnawing at the back of my mind. How would things feel with Michael after his father returned? That evening I made his favorite dinner, more out of habit than anything else. The house was filled with the scent of roast and garlic, comforting reminders of shared moments over the years. Michael had gone out, saying he had a friend to meet up with, leaving the house eerily quiet as I waited. When the door finally opened, my husband stepped in, suitcase in hand, his familiar smile already in place. He looked worn from travel, but his eyes were warm and grateful as they found me. "Home at last," he said, pulling me into a tight hug, breathing me in. "You have no idea how much I missed you." I smiled, sinking into the embrace, hoping it would dispel some of the lingering tension I'd felt all week. "I missed you too," I replied, my voice sounding soft, almost foreign to my own ears. He leaned down to kiss me, his touch as familiar as the feel of my own skin. But my mind wouldn't settle. I could feel that unspoken tension still thick in the air, waiting to surface. We sat down to dinner, and he talked animatedly about his meetings, his clients, the whirlwind of the business trip. I laughed in all the right places, asked him questions, and tried my best to stay present. But it was impossible to shake Michael from my mind. Every so often, my gaze drifted toward the front door, wondering if he would walk in and shatter this quiet reunion with his father. It was close to midnight when I finally heard Michael come through the front door. I was just about to head to bed, but something made me pause, waiting at the top of the stairs, listening to his quiet footsteps as he entered the house. He lingered by the doorway, and I sensed he was as reluctant to walk in as I was to face him. As he turned to walk toward his room, his gaze flickered up, and his eyes met mine across the darkened hallway. His face softened, his expression unreadable in the shadows. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. In that silent exchange, I felt everything. The closeness we shared, the unspoken connection, the confusion that lay heavy between us. And in that moment, I knew he felt it too. The next morning, everything felt stilted and subdued. My husband moved through his morning routine, oblivious to the tension that now felt woven into the walls of the house. Over breakfast, Michael was quieter than usual, his gaze fixed on his plate, lost in thoughts I dared not ask about. My husband finally broke the silence, looking between the two of us with a bemused expression. "You two are awfully quiet today. I thought you'd have caught up on everything while I was away." Michael's eyes darted to mine before he managed a half-hearted smile. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind, I guess. Busy getting ready for exams, I'd imagine." My husband nodded, clearly trying to bridge the strange quiet with normal small talk. Michael nodded, not looking up, his hands subtly tightening around his coffee mug, and the weight of his silence settled over me like a warning. A few days later, as I folded laundry in our bedroom, my husband walked in, watching me with that concerned look I had come to know so well. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft but with a serious undertone that caught my attention. I paused, folding a shirt with a little too much care, forcing a smile. "Of course, just adjusting, you know. Michael being back in the house and you away." He tilted his head, giving me a look that said he knew me too well. "He seems different lately. Did something happen while I was gone?" I felt my pulse quicken, a surge of anxiety creeping in, and I forced myself to keep my expression neutral. "Different how?" he shrugged, his brow creasing slightly. "I don't know. More reserved. He's usually so open with us." I forced a smile, knowing that the less I said, the better. "He's just getting older. They say boys go through these phases." He seemed to accept this, nodding slowly, though I could tell he wasn't entirely convinced. We left it at that. But as he turned to leave the room, he paused. "I know you two have always been close. Maybe he just needs to reconnect with you, feel that support from you. You've always been the one to bring him back around." I smiled at the suggestion, but the weight of his words lingered long after he had left the room. He had no idea how close Michael and I had become, nor the boundaries that now felt strained and blurred in ways I didn't know how to manage. That evening, my husband had already retired to bed when I heard a soft knock at my bedroom door. My heart jumped. I knew who it was, and I braced myself as I walked over, opening the door to find Michael standing there. His expression a mix of hesitation and something deeper. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low. I glanced over my shoulder, seeing the shadow of my husband fast asleep. "Let's go downstairs," I whispered, slipping out of the room and following Michael into the dimly lit living room. He took a seat on the couch, and I settled beside him, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the struggle of something he couldn't quite articulate. Finally, he broke the silence. I don't know how to do this," he whispered. "I don't know how to act like everything is normal when it doesn't feel that way." I felt my throat tighten, I wanted to tell him that we could go back, that things would settle in time. But deep down, I knew we were past that. Michael, this is hard for me too, I murmured, choosing my words carefully. But we have to be careful for everyone's sake. He nodded, but I could see the hurt in his expression, the conflict still raging within him. I know, but I don't know how to stop feeling this way, and I don't think you do either. A tremor ran through me at his words, the intensity of his gaze grounding me to the spot. He reached out, his hand covering mine in a familiar warmth that felt both comforting and dangerous. My heart raced. My mind caught between the comfort of his touch and the knowledge of the line we had come so close to crossing. "Michael," I whispered, my voice trembling. "We can't. It's too risky. We both have to be stronger than this." He nodded slowly, though his gaze didn't waver. "No, I need you to know that I'll always feel this way, even if nothing ever changes between us." My heart ached at the honesty in his words, the vulnerability that had bound us so closely, so irrevocably. In the dim light, our hands still entwined, I felt the weight of our connection settle over me. A quiet acceptance that, though we couldn't have this, it would forever be a part of us. The room was bathed in a quiet stillness, and time itself seemed to pause as Michael's hand began to trace a line down my arm. So softly it was barely a touch at all. His words were a whisper, filled with a yearning that I could both understand and feel deeply within myself. His fingertips lingered, a gentle caress that sent warmth through my skin. His gaze fixed on me with an intensity that left me breathless. "I've loved you for as long as I can remember," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, each word measured as if he wanted to savor every syllable. "I never wanted anyone the way I want you." My mind raced, caught between the overwhelming sense of closeness that filled the room and the knowledge that this was a line we could never truly cross. My heart pounded as I felt myself pulled into his presence, the energy between us alive and fragile, crackling like a spark about to ignite. I wanted nothing more than to stop this moment in time, to remain here with him in this perfect, impossible instant where no one else existed. But reality crept in, a quiet voice in the back of my mind, a reminder of the consequences that loomed like shadows just beyond the warm, delicate light between us. I could feel it growing, pressing down on me. Yet it was nearly drowned by the intensity of his gaze, the sheer depth of feeling that seemed to reach out and envelop me. "Michael," I whispered, my voice trembling, a mixture of resolve and sorrow heavy in the words. "You know we can't." His eyes softened, and I could see the conflict, the pain of unspoken wishes behind them. He didn't let go. His hand found mine, holding it with a tenderness that made it nearly impossible to resist. The weight of his words lingered in the air. And a silent understanding passed between us, a mutual acknowledgement of what we wanted but could never have. "I know it's wrong," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "But being with you, even just like this, it's all I've ever dreamed of." I felt tears sting the corners of my eyes. He had opened his heart, made himself vulnerable, and though my own feelings echoed his, I knew we had to stop this connection, this closeness. It was a love that would remain hidden and precious, never to be fully realized. I reached up, letting my hand graze his face, a gesture that held everything we couldn't say. "You'll always be a part of me, Michael," I whispered, my heart breaking with each word. But we can't keep this going. For your sake, for mine, we have to let go. In that moment, his arms tightened around me, and I held on to him, letting our unspoken emotions find peace in the quiet embrace. It was as if the world had fallen away, leaving just the two of us holding each other in the sanctuary of a love that, while real, would forever be out of reach. After a long silent moment, he released me, his hand lingering, as if reluctant to let go. "I'll never forget this," he whispered, his voice filled with a tenderness that would echo in my heart for years to come. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and as he finally stepped away, I knew that though we could never fully be together, the memory of this night would live on between us. A bittersweet reminder of a love both beautiful and impossible. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and damp earth as I made my way down the familiar dirt road leading to my grandfather's cottage. It had been years since I'd visited this small village, tucked away from the bustling city life I'd grown used to. My world had become a constant whirlwind of work and noise, a blur of nameless faces and missed connections. But this place was different. This village, with its quiet, winding paths and open fields, was where I felt closest to my roots and closer still to my family. And more than anything, I was here because of my grandfather. My grandfather's cottage appeared as I rounded the final curve, a modest wooden structure surrounded by a garden that had grown slightly wild in his absence. His health had been fragile lately, and my mother had insisted someone needed to check on him, stay with him for a while. I knew she meant to go herself, but as usual, life swept her away with responsibilities and obligations, leaving me secretly grateful for the chance to escape. I knocked, though I knew he'd insist I come straight in. Sure enough, his gruff but welcoming voice called out from the other side. "Ah, Lena, there you are, my girl." He looked thinner than I remembered, but his eyes still sparkled with that stubborn resilience I'd always admired. He pulled me into a tight hug, smelling faintly of tobacco and pine. Despite his age, he was a tall, strong man, his voice steady and deep. "You're still as beautiful as ever," he said, stepping back to study me with a broad smile. "The city hasn't made you too fancy, I hope." We laughed as I took off my coat, and he guided me to the living room. The fire crackled in the old stone fireplace, casting a warm glow over the room, filling it with the soft orange light that seemed to reflect the autumn outside. I settled into an armchair as he brought over a pot of tea, setting it down between us with the gentleness he reserved for few things. "You've been taking care of yourself, right?" he asked, pouring a cup and handing it to me. The lines on his face softened as he looked at me with a concerned warmth. "Yes, Grandpa. Busy, but doing well." "I missed this place, though," I admitted, taking a sip of tea. The warmth spread through me, soothing the restless part of me that had been wound up in city life. "I missed you," he chuckled, settling back in his chair. "Well, it's good to have you back, even if the circumstances could be better. I don't get many visitors these days, not since your grandmother passed." I glanced around at the framed photographs lining the walls, moments from his youth, faded pictures of my grandmother, snapshots of my mother and aunts in their younger days. His life, his history was here, intertwined with the walls of this house, with the air itself. "It must be lonely," I said gently. feeling a pang of sadness for the solitude that had come to define his days. "It's hard to imagine what it must feel like," he sighed, and for a moment his eyes grew distant. "You get used to it in a way, but seeing you here, hearing your voice, it brings life back to this place. Reminds me of when you were just a little girl, asking me 100 questions about every little thing." I smiled, remembering the countless summers I'd spent with him as a child. Back then, he was a towering figure in my life, my storyteller, my guide. I had been enchanted by his tales of the village, his stories of the past, of old friends, of adventure and mystery. Those summers had shaped who I was. We spent the rest of the afternoon like that, slipping easily into conversation as if no time had passed at all. As dusk crept over the village, he lit the old oil lamps around the room, casting a soft glow over everything. And just as he had when I was little, he told me stories, stories that grew richer, deeper, more intimate as the hours passed. He spoke of his life with my grandmother, of his youth, and of the difficult choices he'd made along the way. That night, I stayed in the guest room, but sleep was elusive. The familiar sounds of the old house, the creaking floorboards, the gentle groan of the wood as it settled, stirred memories long dormant. I found myself thinking back to the ease with which we'd shared the evening and how different it felt from the superficial relationships I'd come to expect in my own life. The next morning, as we shared breakfast, he looked at me with a tenderness that made me feel like I was his only grandchild, his only family. "Stay a bit longer, Lena," he said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Just a few more days. You bring life into this house." I was taken aback by the request, by the openness in his voice. "Of course, I'll stay as long as you need." We spent the next days immersed in routine, taking morning walks along the forest paths, tending to the overgrown garden, preparing meals together. As the days went on, I noticed how he'd linger nearby, watching me with a quiet intensity. It wasn't strange or uncomfortable. It felt comforting, grounding. It was as if I were looking into a mirror of what my life could have been. Simple, grounded, full of unspoken love. One evening, after we finished dinner, I sat beside him on the couch, our shoulders brushing. He looked at me, and for a moment his expression softened with something that I couldn't name, something that felt as old as the hills themselves. "Thank you for coming, Lena. You remind me of your grandmother, you know," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "I don't know if I'm much like her, but I'll take that as a compliment," I replied, smiling as I looked up at him. He reached out, placing his hand over mine. His fingers, though calloused, were warm, his touch gentle. We stayed like that for a moment, his hand holding mine, our breaths falling into rhythm. There was a bond between us, deeper than words, and it hung in the air, filling the room with something unspoken but profound. As the weeks passed, I grew to cherish each moment, realizing that perhaps I'd found something I hadn't known I was missing. A connection. A place where I belonged without question. The house, the village, the gentle hum of life outside the world I'd known. It all became a part of me, drawing me in as naturally as the seasons. Eventually, I knew I would have to return to my life in the city. But even as I left, I carried a piece of my grandfather's love, his steady, unwavering presence with me. That bond would live on, stronger than time or distance, rooted in memories, in shared silences, and in a love that was bound by family, but enriched by the years between us. Our days together passed in a quiet rhythm, each one threading us closer together in a way I couldn't fully understand. The village felt like it was ours alone, the world shrinking down to just the two of us in that cozy cottage. And as the cold crept in, the chill outside only seemed to amplify the warmth we shared inside. We fell into a routine that felt so natural, as though we had always been together, day in and day out. Every morning we'd go through the rituals we'd created. Breakfast, a walk through the frost-covered woods, talking about anything and everything. With each passing day, we'd share a little more, dig a little deeper, unearth a memory that felt so special it was almost like a secret. My grandfather had always been a bit of a mystery to me, a man of few words with a quiet dignity. But now he was opening up in ways I'd never seen before. One evening, we sat together on the porch after dinner, wrapped in blankets, our breath mingling in the cold night air. The stars above were brighter here than they ever were in the city, and their light gave everything an ethereal glow. He looked over at me, his eyes soft, a slight smile playing on his lips. "You know, you've brought life back into this house, Lena," he said, his voice almost a whisper. I looked back at him, feeling a flutter of warmth in my chest. "I feel the same way. It's peaceful here, being with you." He reached out then, his hand covering mine, just as he had done many times over the past weeks. But this time it lingered, his thumb tracing gentle circles over my knuckles. We sat like that, wrapped in a silence that didn't need to be filled. His presence grounded me, calming something restless inside me. One afternoon, he suggested we go through the old family photo albums together. We spent hours sitting side by side on the floor, flipping through pages of faded memories. He told me stories for each photo. This was him as a boy in the village. That was his first car. Here was my grandmother on their wedding day. His voice grew softer when he spoke of her, his eyes distant, full of a love that had only deepened with time. He talked about her in a way that made me see him not just as my grandfather, but as a man who had lived, who had loved deeply and fully. As the afternoon faded to dusk, I noticed his hand resting on my shoulder, a comforting weight that felt as familiar as my own heartbeat. I leaned into him, letting the closeness fill the room with an unspoken connection. We weren't just sharing memories. We were creating something new, something sacred that was ours alone. That night, as I was turning in, he knocked softly on my door. "Mind if I come in for a moment?" he asked, his voice tentative. "Of course," I said, sitting up as he entered. He hesitated, looking almost shy, his hands tucked into his pockets. I gestured for him to sit beside me, and he lowered himself onto the bed. He looked at me, his eyes warm and kind, but also with a vulnerability I'd never seen before. "You know, I never thought I'd have this again, Lena. This feeling of closeness, of home." His hand found mine, and I held it, feeling his fingers wrap around mine with a quiet strength. "I feel the same," I whispered, my voice catching. "Being here with you, it's like coming home." I didn't realize how much I'd been missing. He smiled, a soft, almost wistful smile. And for a moment, we just looked at each other, letting the silence speak for us. That bond between us, the one that had grown over the weeks, was deeper than anything I could name. I leaned my head on his shoulder, and he placed his arm around me, pulling me close. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of belonging, a connection that went beyond words. It was a closeness I'd never experienced before, a warmth that filled every corner of my heart. I closed my eyes, letting myself savor the moment. And for a while, we just stayed like that, two souls drawn together, finding solace in each other's presence. The silence of the house wrapped around me like a blanket, yet I felt a restlessness beneath it, an unnameable pull that wouldn't let me sleep. I tossed and turned, the quiet making my thoughts louder. Every creak in the old wooden floor, every distant groan of the cottage as it settled into the cool night, reminded me of how close I had come to feeling completely at ease here, and yet something was still missing. Finally, after what felt like hours of chasing sleep in vain, I gave in to the urge that tugged at me. I slipped out of bed and, without really thinking about it, padded down the hall to his room. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see the warm glow of his bedside lamp spilling into the hallway. I hesitated, wondering if I should turn back, but that pull was too strong, urging me forward. I knocked softly, barely more than a tap, but he must have heard because his voice came through low and gentle. "Come in." I pushed the door open, my heart fluttering. He was sitting up in bed, reading an old book, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. When he looked up and saw me standing there, a soft smile broke across his face, the kind that always made me feel like I was the most important person in his world. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his tone tender. I nodded, stepping into the room, feeling suddenly like a child again, coming to him for comfort. I kept thinking about our talk earlier, and I don't know. I just didn't want to be alone right now. He set his book aside, patting the space beside him on the bed. "Come sit with me." I crossed the room and sat down, folding my legs up and resting against the headboard. There was something so natural, so easy about being there with him. He reached over, gently placing a hand on my shoulder, and a warmth spread through me, settling into that hollow part of me that had felt so empty for so long. "Sometimes," he said softly, his eyes distant, "when your grandmother was still here, we'd sit up late like this, talking until the sun began to rise." He chuckled, a bittersweet sound. It was those quiet late-night moments that made us feel closest. I smiled, leaning into his touch. "I think I know what you mean," I whispered, meeting his gaze. There was an unspoken understanding between us, a shared vulnerability that neither of us needed to put into words. Being there with him in the stillness of the night felt like finding something precious I hadn't even known I'd lost. He sighed, looking at me with that gentle expression that seemed to see right through to my heart. "You know, Lena, I may not be around forever, but I'm so grateful for these moments we have together. It's like you've given me a second chance to feel alive again." His words stirred something deep within me, something raw and honest, and I found myself reaching out, placing my hand over his. He looked down at our intertwined fingers, his thumb brushing over mine, and the room felt charged with an unspoken intensity that both comforted and unsettled me. After a moment, he gently tugged my hand, pulling me close. I leaned against him, resting my head on his shoulder as he wrapped his arm around me, holding me close. The warmth of his embrace, the steady beat of his heart beneath my cheek. It was all so familiar, so safe. "You mean a lot to me, Grandpa," I murmured, my voice barely a whisper. "More than you probably know," He pressed a soft kiss to the top of my head, his breath warm against my hair. And you, Lena, you've brought a joy back into my life I thought I'd lost forever. We stayed like that, wrapped up in each other's warmth, the night stretching on in a comfortable silence. And for the first time, I felt a calm settle over me, a peace that felt almost sacred, as if we had found something timeless and true, something that would stay with us always, even when this night was long gone.